This weekend, I was able to continue reading through this book of a collection of essays by Abraham Maslow. And he has one in here called Towards a Humanistic Biology. So he's a psychologist writing this is probably in the 60s, to biologists. So he's talking to scientists. And he made a point in here that I had never run into before personally. And I found it extraordinary. And he's talking to scientists, and he's trying to say that science, from its inception, has been driven by the process of removing one's self, removing the observer from the experiment in order to find objectivity, and that is a path into things that are increasingly true. And he says that's correct, that it was incredibly helpful to do that. In fact, you also had to remove superstition from the process and a lot of religious and structures around God and God's involvement in the process in order to see what was actually going on, removing the filters of culture and religion. He said all kinds of wonderful things came about as a result of that. And it's amazing. Very effective method. But science originally was primarily interested in studying things and objects. Now, of course, this is before science broke off from philosophy. So that goes way back. But after the Enlightenment and the turn of the last 200-300 years, science was studying primarily things and objects as the scientific method got perfected. And in the study of things and objects, removing yourself increases objectivity. And then he said biologists came along and they started to study animals and the process of life. And with the lower forms of animals, the more simple animals, that works fine. This same idea of removing oneself works great in the pursuit of what is true, the finding of reality. But then he makes a claim that I thought was fascinating. He said, when we started to study and use science to study the humans or the higher animals, it became, to his view, increasingly clear that the removal of self actually didn't lead to objectivity. That actually objectivity was a function of love. And that if you could love, you could actually see the subject of your observation in a more true way. And I was like, I had never heard that perspective before, that there are certain types of research where the truth or the quality of research is enhanced by loving the subject. He talks about, well, let's say it this way. If you think about love, and then you can move in multiple directions away from love, ways in which you can decrease love. One of them is you can move away from love into fear or anxiety at its extreme. And if you think about observing someone's behavior or watching them live their life and trying to understand who they are and what makes them tick, anxiety is a terrible lens to observe them through. In fact, what we tend to see is not objectivity at all. We tend to see a lack of objectivity or subjectivity, which is to say, we often see in others the things that scare us about ourselves the most. So we're actually seeing our own dysfunction in people on a regular basis. Or you can move away from love in a different direction. And I think you might find boredom. And boredom, I don't think increases objectivity. Boredom makes a person less visible to you. In fact, you might not even see them at all. And he makes that point. If you become bored with your subject, you're just going to stop your research. Or in a different direction away from love is maybe hate, to despise something. And you can't see the authentic self. You can't see the essence of the one that you're studying if you also despise them. He says it's actually being able to love something that allows you to see the truth found there. He said, most of science is about prediction and control. You're trying to control the environment and predict outcomes, and then do that in a way that's replicatable. And again, that's a fantastic tool in most of science. But when working with humans, with other people, the idea of prediction and control becomes increasingly less helpful. In fact, when you truly love somebody, You lose the desire to control them. You're not afraid of them anymore, or you're not afraid of yourself in them. In fact, control is the natural response to fear. So it's interesting. The idea of doing science via love is interesting. And this led me to think about this word control and how it applies to leadership, because I'm increasingly becoming convinced that the methodologies that most of us use for leadership are actually veiled control or very sophisticated mechanisms of control. But it's true that increasingly, the motive set that is necessary to allow people to do quality work is actually intrinsic to who they are. And so to be able to see and understand the people that we lead, the people we work with, the people we collaborate with, I think we have to see through a lens of love, the way Maslow is describing. If you don't appreciate, or if you're not fascinated by the people that you're leading, if they don't intrigue you, and just observing them makes you come alive. If you're constantly trying to change them and mess with them and fix them and shape them, that feels like control mechanisms. And so I think there's a way in which Maslow's articulation of a science that leads to objectivity through love could be extended to say that there is a leadership which leads to an objective view of the world around you, those you lead, your organization, that the filter has to be love. I think he's calling us to love each other, which I think is a pretty ancient call.